I'm here at the Chateau Margaux estate in Bordeaux. Chateau Margaux has been producing incredibly outstanding wines for centuries here. But since the Menzelopoulos family bought this estate in the 1970s, they've excelled to another level, with great wines such as the 1982, the 1986, 2000, 05, and of course 9 and 10. We're going to be heading in and doing some wine tasting with Executive Director Paul Pontallier shortly. We're going to be tasting the 2011 wine, the 2008, and of course that magnificent 2009. So why don't you come with me, we'll find Paul, and we're going to do some magnificent tasting.
Let's start with the Pavillon Rouge first, 11. Once again, I think it's very important to taste those last very young, that's course.
Now the 2011 vintage was for many producers a little bit more of a challenge.
Yeah, sure.
So tell me a little bit about the growing year that year in 11.
11 was amazing because actually, and a lot of people may not know that this was the driest spring we probably have ever recorded, meaning that March, April, May, June were extremely dry. Which obviously is always good for the vineyards here because the soils have always enough water just to feed the vines. But such a drought had the main consequence of the drought was a very small crop, to make a long story short.
Okay.
So, and then the summer was rather cool and more or less humid, not lots of rain, but kind of average rainfall, so which are not the typical conditions of a grape vintage. And then we had perfect conditions at harvest again. So difficult to understand exactly in 11. There are very positive aspects, a few negative ones, and as usual in those circumstances, it's the terroir which makes the difference. Just a very small crop first. This is the smallest crop we have made in the last 20 years, which is quite amazing, since actually 91, since we had a big spring frost. So very small crop, which means extremely concentrated wine. And by the way, these wines are richer in tannins than any previous vintage. Amazing. On the other side, the second characteristic of 11 after the drought is the precociousness, the fact that we started harvesting in 11 earlier than not than ever, but this was the earliest harvest since 1893. So early harvest means that whatever the conditions of summer are, the grapes are always given a fair chance to get ripe, because the grapes ripen in August and not in September.
Right.
So 11 is characterized by those two conditions. First of all, good level of ripeness, because it was very early, and number two, very small crop, lots of concentration. That's it. And 11 would probably have been a great vintage should the summer have been a little bit drier. On the other side, should 11 have happened 20 years ago, we would have considered it as a great vintage. Once again, there is always that important thing that we judge the wine relatively to its time.
Lovely nose.
Amazing to taste such a young wine, which is just, well, 8 months old, 9 months old.
This spice, this tannin, it has a very fresh quality to it, a very drinkable quality to it, which I find interesting. You know, you wouldn't think, a young Margaux, even the second wine, you would think, okay, it's not going to be quite approachable. This is very approachable.
But this is, as we were commenting before, this is what has always made, and of course still makes Margaux so special. Just have to realize, told you that 11 is basically the richest wine in tannins which we have ever produced, or since we can measure those things, since the last 50 years. And at the same time, as you said, this is extremely approachable.
And you know, even though the tannins are certainly structured, they don't overwhelm the fruit.
No.
You know, it's amazing for you to see, for me to hear you say that this is the biggest tannic structure that you've had in some time, and yet it's not. It's perfectly integrated. It's not overwhelming at all.
But strength has in wine, like in people, nothing to do with its size. It has to do with the density. And then at this point you have the fruit. You have that fresh fruit. And when I say fruit, I'm talking about just the nose, because it's not just fruit. You have also some floral aspects. You mentioned spiciness as well. It's actually very difficult to describe, because all these components are so intimately blended together that it's hard to describe the way it smells.
You know, it's like a fine piece of fabric that has, you know, multiple different weaves into it, and you know that they're there, but they integrate so perfectly. It's very difficult to always identify each one.
Remember that we also have two other blends. We have the fourth wine, the third wine, and the Pavillon Rouge is the second one. So the Pavillon Rouge is not just what cannot go into the first. It is the result now of a very strict selection as well. And to give you an idea, in 2011, the first wine represents about a little more than 1/3 of the total crop, 37%. The Pavillon Rouge, only 27%.
It's very small.
And all the rest goes into third and fourth. So this is, to make a long story short, this is like if we were dividing the crop into almost 3 equal shares. First, second, and third and fourth. So this is a very strict selection for the Pavillon Rouge as well. But let's go with the first now. Different nose. Slightly different proportion of variety, by the way. The first wine is made of almost pure Cabernet Sauvignon. The Cabernet Sauvignon accounts for 87–88% here. In the Pavillon Rouge it was only 65–66%. So very little Merlot in the Chateau Margaux, or only 10% I would say, and the rest is a little bit of Cabernet Franc and Pivot.
Just beautiful, deep, rich, dark fruit in this.
Amazing subtlety and depth.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Once again, we have that combination of something which is extremely subtle, refined, complex, and deep as well.
I was going to use the word depth. There's tremendous depth in this wine, and a sense of, even on the nose, a richness of sort of a very deep, sweet fruit. This is just
this is amazing that once again, already at the nose, we have that combination of things which are normally not combined together, like the subtlety, the refinement, the delicacy, and the depth, and that huge depth. You want to smell more because you have a hard time trying to capture that flavor.
Well, I've always thought of the nose of these wines sort of evoking sort of intellectual thought, conversation. It's just it's so complex. There is so much. It's almost an intellectual wine of sorts. There's just so much going on.
Yes, it's very central too.
Extremely.
So it combines like basically everything which we can enjoy listening or just looking at in life, and it's just like an extraordinary piece of music. You just enjoy intellectually as well, but also sensually, and the depth of that goes beyond your perception of it.
Yes, I agree.
And here once again, the length, which is much.
It's deeper. It's
deep.
Long.
And it's
tight.
tighter.
It is tight. It is tight. And
it's
and the tannin structure is a little bit bigger than the Pavillon Rouge, but just wonderful, wonderful experience. I mean, this just goes on and on the lips. This is just a phenomenal
Actually,
experience.
the more I taste lemon, the more I regard it as once again, as it would have been regarded 20 years ago, without, even 10 years ago, without any problem as a great vintage. That's so funny. Now, the problem is that 11 being born after 9 and 10, who can pretend, who can dare say that 11 is great when we just had those extraordinary ones before? But in a different set of circumstances, I think this would have been. I try to remember how I would have qualified 11 should I have tasted it in the mid of the 90s, for example. Outside of 95, 96, I'm not sure that 11 would have been downgraded compared.
Well, and you know, for all of the press that's been given to 2011, making it sound as if it was sort of suffering under the 2009 and 2010, I would say this is certainly an outstanding wine, and you know, maybe you'll be surprised in 10 years. We'll, you know, the nose, the palate on this, you'll turn around and say, you know what, this great terroir made another great wine.
Yeah, sure.